Hi everybody, thank you for joining us today. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Sarah Leet. I'm one of the directors of Lawrence Dean Recruitment. We've partnered with Helen Chapman this morning to go through the webinar, which I hope will add value to your business and your teams. If you need any additional information, my contact details are on screen. Please reach out to me and I'd be happy to help. I will now pass you over to Helen, who will introduce herself and explain a bit more about what we're going to cover this morning.
Thank you, Sarah. And good morning to all of you, and thank you for inviting me to join your group for this discussion. I think you've been meeting for a week or so, and that you've got a good network going. So thank you for letting me join you. I should introduce myself, but only just a little, because many of you, well, not many of you, some of you know me already from my work at North Herts College, and I think I've worked with a couple of you as well as my consultancy. So I think also my bio and a link to my LinkedIn profile has been shared with you. It's on the final slide if you want it. Essentially, I'm an HR professional through and through. I spent the first part of my career in HR and in learning development, and then after working in a senior HR role at the local college, I moved across to their teaching side to become programme manager for the CIPD suite of qualifications, and that's where I've met some of you, because we do level 3, 5 and 7. 5 years ago though, I left the college to set up my own business, and I've been running a consultancy service ever since. I've got a varied portfolio. I'm an HR consultant for a few businesses. I run bespoke learning and development programs for a few, and I also have a project that I run which is senior management team building, which is underpinned by coaching, because I'm also an executive coach. So I'm very busy, but it's really good fun and I love it. And I also continue to manage and teach on the CIPD courses. So I definitely don't have all the answers, but as I say to my clients, I do know where to find the answers, where to find them out, and more importantly, how to work with the client, work with the organisation to make the answers fit. So let's get started. What are we doing today? What are we talking about? The title, as you can see, is this monumental change. How can HR support now and in the future? Now, Sarah and I felt that this was such a huge topic, hugely important topic for you all, because we've had the most astonishing change happened, and it's worth trying to pick some of the elements of that change apart so that you can see what you're dealing with. So hopefully, this is my agenda. What do we already know? And you can see there are some other elements in here. So I'm going to cover all of these bullet points if we have time, but I've got the bit at the end going forward, how can we lead change rather than just react? And I've got a couple of academic theories in there. Now, I don't think I'm going to get time to cover these, but I thought I would pop them in case that's something that you're interested in. If we have an extra few minutes, we'll have a look at this. If we don't, then the slides are there just for you as a reference. This is a big, big topic. And if you were to study at level 7, it's a whole unit. And so you would spend weeks on it. So my challenge is to keep it brief. So I've tried to keep to the basics for you, but I would invite any of you to be in contact after the event if you'd like to discuss it in more detail or in more depth, or of course your own individual circumstances. So my main focus is looking at the current situation that we're facing at the moment. But I also wanted to raise some questions for you to think about going forward, because I don't even know whose expression it is, but this too will pass. This time will move on. We won't be facing this forever. So let's move forward. What do we already know about change? So I think what you'll find really quite amusing is that the definition of change management, if you look it up in any of the dictionary or business book or whatever, and it goes along the lines of, it's the process of achieving the smooth implementation of change by planning, by introducing it systematically, and by taking into account the likelihood of it being resisted. Well, oh my goodness, how different could the situation be that we have faced since March? Smooth implementation, maybe. Planning, no. Introducing it systematically, probably not. Taking into account people's responses, didn't have time for that either. Personally, never, ever, ever in my career, which, as I've already explained, is pretty lengthy, have I ever faced such a professional challenge and found that when you look around you, there are no rules to follow, employment laws virtually out the window, and no good practice, nobody doing anything better, everybody just reacting and responding. So, how could you possibly have anticipated any of that? So we had to deal with a very, very difficult change. More realistically, I suppose, another explanation of the topic and taking it forward is that it's often said that the only thing constant, the only thing that doesn't change about change, is that change will always happen. So it's never going to be one of those situations where you're looking forward and you can go, right, that's where we're at for the next 5 years. Not going to happen. Hasn't happened like that for decades. So you know, it's always happening. And what I think I would probably suggest to you is that where possible, not including situations like this, where possible, change cannot be allowed to just happen. It has to be managed. So where possible, manage it. And we'll have a look at that in a minute. We know that change can happen step by step, and that can be an organisational choice, or you can go the whole hog, make it transformational. You need the big disrupting influence. Regardless, clearly about people, it's about development, therefore it's the role of HR, and it's always going to fall in your laps, and you will be leading it in many, many cases. So what does change look like? Now, there are some different types of change, and just to set the scene, set the backdrop for you, we have strategic change. It's broad agenda, it's long term, and it's organisational wide issues. That's strategic change. It's about moving to a future state that has already been defined in terms of a strategic vision and a strategic scope. Often about growth or quality or innovation, competitive positioning, those sorts of high level strategic decisions that are made, and the organisation needs to support that. Secondly, we have operational change. This one relates to new systems or procedures, structure, organisational structures or technology. This type of change has an immediate effect on working arrangements. And whilst you may know that on the grand scheme of things, this is not a big impact change, there's a good chance that it will affect your staff in just as much as the big changes, so it has to be handled just as carefully. We then have what we're calling transformational change. And this is the sort of change, as I said, it's disrupting, it's looking at comprehensive changes to the way the business works. So that will often be about culture or the values underpinning your work. It may be about how you operate. So, you know, for some organisations, you know, maybe moving online or self-service or elements like that. And also organisational structures. So we have those three changes, and up until 3 months ago, that would pretty much be as far as we went in terms of looking at the different types of changes. But oh, look what we have now, crisis. We are in the middle of change that is being imposed by a crisis. Now, we have seen events like this before. These are events of massive proportion. So like 9/11, like the financial crash, and years going forward, we will be talking about COVID-19. Where were you when Boris announced a lockdown? You know, those sorts of elements. So we need, this is the I'm talking about change in its entirety, but I keep wanting to focus on what we're dealing with now. So the crisis. Okay, so why is change and managing change, why is it such a big deal? So I wasn't sure whether all of you would know this slide and go, oh, right, yeah, okay, I see how it fits, or whether some of you may be unfamiliar with it. So as I said, I'm going to go over the basics. Those of you who know this, sit back and relax. Those of you for whom it's new, you'll enjoy this slide. This was one will bring a lot of interesting people's behaviours to the. You'll start to understand it a bit better. So if you haven't heard of it, I'll give you an overview, but you're looking for Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you want to go and look it up after the session, I think, being a people person, as you are if you're at this HR, you will find it very interesting. So in a nutshell, back in the day, a theory was developed by an academic called Maslow, who said that as we live life, we have a number of needs that need to be met. He said that those needs could be divided into categories, but very importantly, there was a hierarchy, and that is to say that the bottom needs are the most important, and those needs need to be met for the next category higher up for them to be important. So basically, if your physiological needs aren't being met, then safety and security won't be important. So I thought I'd take you through this and explain a bit more about what that means in the workplace, because it's a theory that relates to life and psychology and sociology, but it works very much in terms of organisational psychology as well. So we're going to start at the bottom, which is the physiological needs. Now, the physiological needs in this hierarchy refer to the most basic human needs. So in terms of ordinarily speaking, we're talking about like food and water, heat, but that's in life. But in a workplace, we're talking about, you would normally expect to be providing as an employer comfortable working environment. So I'll assume that most of your staff were in a workplace for the purpose of this. So place to get water, somewhere to eat, access to toilets and stuff, but basically comfortable working environment. Now, more importantly, when applied to the workplace, one of your physiological needs is a steady income to support yourself and pay for somewhere to live, food, utilities and other essential needs. Now, immediately I can feel you, or hopefully I can feel you going, I get it. Because what happens with COVID-19 is that for all of us, we had no idea whether we were going to be affected to a point where we would not have a steady income. So immediately in this hierarchy, in that bottom green of the triangle, I'm pointing at it, but you can't see me pointing at it. Those of you that have seen me present before know I use my hands a lot. But that bottom element is shaky ground, which pulls the triangle. The rest of the triangle is then wobbly as well. So we do not have our physiological needs being met. So immediately there's an issue here. This is why it's a big deal. Moving up the hierarchy and looking at the second level, which is safety and security. And another part of this in the workplace, if we were in the workplace as usual, this would be about ergonomic office furniture, freedom from risk of injury, securing the building to prevent potentially dangerous people from entering. Those would be the sort of safety aspects that you would be considering as an employer. Another aspect of safety is about feeling emotionally safe, secure, and supported. And then it goes on, we would go on to explore, well, what does that actually mean? It means if you're worried about losing your job, that would be to layoffs, to budget cuts normally, or from the COVID impact of COVID, then it's really challenging to stay motivated and to stay performing. So again, I can feel you understanding that that second level is wobbly too. Now, Maslow's hierarchy explained that if the bottom elements are not being met, then your drive to be motivated to get the higher up needs become less and less important. So you don't actually focus on those higher levels if the bottom two, but and we've already said the bottom two could potentially not be being met, and certainly people may feel that it's not being met. But I do just want to talk about love and belonging. Now, obviously, in a workplace, that's different from your home life, where you've got your social groups, you've got your relationships, your family, your friends. We're not quite talking about that, but you know what it's like at work. There are people that you get on with, there are people that you work with. It can often be like a family. You've got your teams. Depending on how your organisation operates, there is a sense of belonging to the workplace. Now, sometimes it's not easy for people to establish and form relationships at work. So companies spend a lot of time creating good team dynamics, or maybe having social activities outside, or relationship building, both inside and outside the office, to try to get those high rates of employee engagement. We know that organisations that perform well spend time building relationships inside and outside the business. So here, if we look at the situation that we're in, a lot of people look to the workplace for meeting that need and going in and saying, how was your weekend? When everyone is working from home or trying to go back into the workplace and having the 2 meters that you're not used to, for example, Aviva are taking their call centre staff back in, and there's going to be 8 desks between the people. Now, that's not the same as just looking next door to someone and saying, you know, how was your weekend, or how was that call that sounded difficult? So again, you've got another element of the hierarchy of needs that has been thrown onto shaky ground. And what that means for you as an HR professional is that you have a lot of work to do with your staff, but also with yourself. And, you know, let's use a common phrase of self-care. You have to look at your own responses. These levels are not potentially not being met. And a really important role would be to try to reassure staff and build those levels back up. So we'll talk more about what you can do in a minute. I would just go quickly over the top 2 elements. Self-esteem is about understanding that you are a contribution, and the contributions you are making are being recognised by the workplace. So that would be promotion, or recognition through other reward systems from the organisation, but also positive feedback and encouragement. So that's what self-esteem at work means. And then self-actualization at work is about someone really feeling empowered and trusted, which also encourages growth and engagement. So those 2 levels are at the top. Now, if you're not, you have to address the bottom 3, and then as everyone settles, you can look to the top 2, because those are still elements that you would want to support. So that's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I think that's that slide and the next slide that I'm going to be looking at with you are probably the most key slides that I'm going to talk to you about today, because you need to understand what's happening for your staff as they faced this monumental change. So we are kind of 2-3 months into this massive massive change. But the next slide that I'm going to show you talks about the process that somebody goes through in terms of coming to terms with the change that has happened to them. So the Maslow's hierarchy of needs is saying, why is change such a big impact on people? And I've given you one explanation based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And now I want to have a look at this slide, which is the Kubler-Ross change curve, which will help you to understand different individuals' responses and how you might help them. So we're going to spend a bit of time on this slide, and I've got some animations on this one to try and highlight what I'm talking about, because I know how difficult it is to just sit and listen, especially if the screen isn't changing. So hopefully I'll be able to keep your attention by just some tiny little graphics that are going to pop up. And don't worry, there's no quiz at the end that says what was the colour of the ball that went through, just to make sure you're paying attention. Okay, so the Kubler-Ross change curve is a model developed by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross in the 60s, actually, so quite a long time ago. And she was explaining the grieving process that was associated with terminally ill patients and their families. And since then, it has been used in many different settings, but importantly for us, in the organisational setting, as a way of helping people understand their reactions to significant change or upheaval. So again, if you haven't heard of this before, you will find this incredibly useful in helping you understand why people are reacting the way that they are. We've already said we're using Maslow to understand why it's such a big deal. This is to help you understand individual responses. And after this session is over, have a look again and see where you are, see what happened for you and your process. Because I always find that when you're trying to understand people's reactions, a bit of emotional intelligence about your own responses and other people's and where they're different, having some understanding behind that will really help you to be empathetic and to know what's the right way to respond. So I'm going to go through the model, then I'm going to talk to you about what you in HR can do to help. So basically, we've got it's a 7-stage process. So if you look online, you'll find lots of different adaptations of this model. I like this one best, and I've had to adapt it a little bit to make it easy to talk about it with you. So we've got 7 steps, and you'll see on the bottom we've got a timeline, which is your horizontal axis, and we've got morale and confidence as your vertical axis on the left-hand side. Again, I'm pointing, so if you can hear my rings rattling. Okay, so stage 1, step 1. So there we go. Stage 1 has 2 steps in it. Step 1 is talking about the shock or the surprise of this, of the change. And it's the initial shock, while frequently short-lived, will result in slowdown, possibly loss of productivity, performance tends to dip sharply, and individuals who are normally clear, decisive, suddenly start seeking a bit more guidance and reassurance, and you might find deadlines are missed. And it can be a bit of a rabbit in the headlines where people are just like, whoa, I literally do not know what to do next. After that, the second step in stage 1 is about denial. And at this point, the focus tends to remain on the past. They seem to feel like maybe this not much is actually going to change. So, you know, if we're talking about COVID-19, we were looking at China, we were sort of wondering whether it was their diet and their buying from particular markets. We looked at Italy, so what won't happen here? They've got an older population, they have different family groups. It's not going to be like that here. It's just a bad case of flu. So it's sort of like you're looking, you can see on my slide, looking for evidence that it isn't true, it isn't going to happen. And for a while, people convince themselves that it won't happen, and if it does happen, it won't affect them. And here, performance can often just pop back and it's fine, but it's because they're just carrying on as they always have and denying that it's going to happen. Okay, we then move to stage 2, which is talking about a sort of anger and depression. So the first part of this is the frustration that you can't get the right information that you need. You don't have enough information to understand what's going on. You may feel that you don't trust the people that are telling you the information. You may feel that they're withholding. So often there's like a scapegoating, and you start blaming other people for what's happening. So sometimes that can be the organisation, sometimes it can be another group, or it can be individuals. And of course, sometimes it's HR because you're the messenger. But focusing the blame on someone or something allows, really, to be perfectly honest, a continuation of the denial, because you're just providing another focus. There'll be suspicion, skepticism, frustration. And as you can see, the curve is going down. This is people's morale and confidence, so their self-esteem, their productivity, their performance is going right down to almost half. So the lowest point of the curve comes when the anger begins to wear off and the realization that the change is genuine. It's common for our morale to be low, and then you've got self-doubt and anxiety, and these levels peak in this depression time. It's hard, the feelings may be hard to express, and depression is possible as the impact of what has been lost is acknowledged. Now, unfortunately, this period is associated with apathy, isolation, and remoteness. And this is the point at which we ask people to work from home, or to come in and work in an environment that was so very, very different from what they were used to. So they're very, very difficult time. Now we've got another little stage. No, not that one. We've got the bit that I've added in is experiment. Now here, what we're finding is that some people will be able to start engaging. So they'll start with the new technology, or they'll start with new systems and the processes, and my baby steps, but it will start to work. So they're starting to feel as if there's something that they can hang on to. Then stage 3 is a much more optimistic and enthusiastic mood to emerge. Individuals accept the change is inevitable, and begin to work with the changes rather than against them. So the primary feeling, they start to see the positives, so not having to get out your pajamas, that you can put the washing on, or you can work from home, or you start to find ways of making it work. A couple of other things that are in this element: you might be impatient because you're ready to go, and the systems, as everybody, other parts of the business catch up with you, can be a bit frustrating, but basically this is a positive, and you can see the morale and the confidence level is building up. And then finally, we have integration. This is the focus on the future and a sense that progress can be made. By the time everybody reaches this stage, the change situation has firmly replaced the original, and you've got a new reality. Okay, so what I wanted to do is just to explain to you that these 7 stages, everybody, all of your staff will go through these 7 stages, and they will go through them in this order. So if we follow the, so you can watch the little ball on the screen, and what this is trying to highlight is this performance and morale. It goes down to a dip and then it comes up again. So the important thing for you to remember is that follows this curve. So it'll be interesting for you to think about how long did it take you to get from shock to integration. For some people, this is an extremely swift process. They don't dwell on the negatives, they have a very positive outlook, they have a lot of confidence, and they can get to decision and integration very quickly. For other people, they get stuck at many levels, particularly the anxiety and the depression associated with stage 2. So it's really important to recognise that your staff will take their own time to work through this, and that your line managers need to understand this curve and where their staff might be getting stuck and how to support them. So I've got just a tiny bit more on this slide. How can you support someone going through shock? Be conscious of the time. With early communication, you can minimise the shock effect by acknowledging their feelings and empathising with their worries and respecting the way the work was done in the past. So we all know not everything was bad about the way it was being done, and it's important to acknowledge that. With denial, here, you will need to talk with logic, you will need to show while there be a change, and you will need to explain how it benefits employees and the organisation. And you will need to spend time on this because, as I said, you may have lost some trust as people go through this process. Try to diffuse the anger by listening with empathy and making sure that there are some good two-way communication channels so that the comments and conversations that people want to have are genuinely being heard and being taken seriously. And then in this stage, empathy, active listening, good support structures are the best solutions in this phase. Here, be ready to ask, to answer many questions, even if you feel they're not relevant. It's part of the process of the people starting to engage. You can reward, in inverted commas, both public and private recognition for those people who have adopted the change. So be sensitive, but try to show and demonstrate where things are working well. And then finally, make sure you engage fully with individuals and teams with their new solutions, and make sure you're supporting them as they go forward with their new systems. Okay, so that, bless her, is Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and the change cycle. Okay, so moving on very quickly. Why do people resist change? Because of all of those reasons that we've talked about in Maslow's hierarchy of needs and their progress through the Kubler-Ross change curve and the time that it takes them to do it. So I've got some other elements that you might find interesting to think about. These are just headings. Because of time, I'm not going to go into it in too much detail, but if you want any more detail about this, do give me a shout after we've finished. So, armed with the knowledge of Maslow's hierarchy of needs and with the Kubler-Ross change curve, what can you do to help or support staff overcome the resistance to change? So do not underestimate how difficult this job is. It's not easy because you have got to understand that it's different mechanisms for different different staff groups, so for individuals, teams, line managers, the organisation. You're going to have to be very adaptable. You're going to have to think, who am I dealing with? Which makes it difficult because you can't just have a script. I would use the previous slide as a checklist of elements that might be the reasons. So identify the reasons, but most importantly, talk to the staff and try to find out. But it could be a checklist that you share with line managers, team leaders. So you do some analysis, do try to identify the reasons, listen very carefully to what the staff or the staff representatives are saying, so that you can relieve those fears, those concerns that are not genuine, that are gossip or anxiety fueled what ifs. Try to deal with those as quickly as you can be and resolve ambiguities. Use change agents. That just means people who are really cool with change, really on board. Get them to help you support the other staff. Involve the staff in the decision-making process as far as possible, because if they can own it, then they will feel part of the change rather than it just having it imposed on them. And then just keep communicating. If that's the biggest, that's my biggest suggestion. Okay, so going forward, if you want a more systematic process, and these are the slides that I said I wouldn't spend too much time on. So I've put two here for you, a fairly traditional method, Cotter, and then the Thaler and I'm not sure I spelled that right, sorry, but Sunstein, and the nudges approach. I've got two slides for you. So there's Cotter, and that I've given you a reference because I thought I wouldn't get time to do it for you. So you can have a look at that if you want a systematic process when we get back to ordinary work. And then a more modern approach, and there's an example in the civil service of the nudge theory being used. I think you'll find those both of those quite interesting. One's traditional, one's more contemporary. So that's more for going forward. So final elements. My suggestion: guideline managers and teams in emotional intelligence around individuals' responses to change. So try to build up their confidence and knowledge around what might be happening for people. Shape the political dynamics to support the process. So make sure the organisation, the internal politics are supporting people through this process. So a lot of people-oriented dynamics. Make arrangements that control the transition if you can. So do what you can to make staff, the organisation, feel that there is some element of control. Motivate, if you have got reward systems, motivate to achieve the changes. This one, building stability, emphasise what's not altering. There is a limit to what people can cope with. So don't start doing different changes that aren't crucial. And look at your change agents who can help you support this. Now, this is often just the HR team, but there's normally some good line managers or team leaders that you can work with. Thank you, everybody. Hope to hear from you soon.
Take care. Thank you very much.